All right, today we are diving into one single, absolutely explosive event, the Leipzig debate of 1519. Now, this wasn't just some academic squabble. Oh no, this was the moment Martin Luther was backed into a corner and forced to cross a line that would ultimately fracture the entire Christian world.
And even before the debate, you can see just how radical Luther's thinking was becoming. This is a secret admission he made to a friend. I mean, just think about that for a second. The idea that the Pope, the supposed vicar of Christ on earth, could actually be the Antichrist? That was a horrifying thought, and it's a thought that was about to be dragged out into the open for everyone to see.
But before we get to that big public showdown, you've got to understand this really strange political moment that created a kind of calm before the storm. It's one of those classic cases in history where a massive power vacuum in Europe just hits the pause button on everything.
So, the Holy Roman Emperor dies, and suddenly, the Pope's entire list of priorities gets shuffled. His main goal now, influencing who becomes the next emperor. And to do that, he desperately needed the vote of one very important man, Elector Frederick the Wise. And who does Frederick the Wise happen to be protecting? Yep, Martin Luther. All of a sudden, trying to crush this pesky monk became really bad politics.
So what does the Pope do? He completely pivots from threats to flattery. He sends his envoy, Karl von Miltitz, on a full-on charm offensive. The plan was simple. Shower Frederick with gifts, like this super prestigious holy relic called the Golden Rose, and even dangle the possibility of making him a cardinal, anything to get him to just quietly shut his university's noisy theologian up.
But as Miltitz traveled through Germany, he discovered something that changed the entire game. He realized that just marching in and arresting Luther was completely off the table. Why? Well, he started talking to people, in taverns and inns, and he found out that for every one person who supported the Pope, there were 3 who were backing Luther. The guy had overwhelming popular support.
Okay, so faced with this new reality, Miltitz brokers a deal. Basically, a ceasefire in this growing war of words. And Luther, who really did want to de-escalate things, agrees. He promises to stay quiet on one condition, that his opponents do the same. For a split second there, it really looked like the whole crisis might just blow over.
But of course, that silence was never going to last, was it? And it was shattered by a guy who not only broke the truce, but seemed to absolutely love doing it. A brilliant, ambitious theologian named John Eck was just itching for a fight.
So you've got these 2 men, and they could not be more different. On one side, you have Martin Luther, this intense, scholarly type, a perfect forest of words and ideas. And on the other, you've got John Eck. He's a professional debater, physically imposing, with a butcher's face and a voice like a bull. And he was famous for having this insane memory and a mind as sharp as a razor. This wasn't going to be a disagreement. This was going to be a clash of titans.
And Eck, you see, was a master strategist. He didn't just pick a random fight. He set the perfect trap. He publicly challenged Luther on the divine origin of the Pope's power. It was an issue so fundamental, so central to the Church's authority, that Luther simply couldn't stay silent. If he did, he'd be conceding the whole argument. The bait was set.
Now get this, the local bishop actually tried to forbid the debate. He could smell the controversy a mile away. But the ruler of Leipzig, Duke George, he wanted to hear the arguments for himself. He overruled the bishop with his really simple, powerful logic. And so the stage was set.
And so we arrive at the main event, the showdown in the massive grand hall of Leipzig's castle. And believe me, this was so much more than an academic exercise. This was a debate for the very soul of the Church.
I mean, just picture the scene here. The tension must have been unbelievable. Luther shows up with 200 of his students, carrying battle axes, to a theological debate. The city, meanwhile, gives his opponent Eck a 76-man bodyguard. The whole thing kicks off with a formal mass and a choir singing Come Holy Spirit. This was pure, high-stakes drama.
So Luther opens up with this really sharp historical argument. He says, look, the Pope's absolute power isn't from God. It's a much more recent human invention. And his proof is brilliant. He points to the saints of the Greek Orthodox Church. They were all saved, they're all in heaven, and they never once acknowledged the Pope's authority. His question is simple but deadly. If they're saved, how can the Pope's power be absolute?
It was a really clever point, but this is where John Eck showed he was playing a completely different game. See, Eck didn't really care about debating history. He was there to spring a trap, a lethal one.
So let's just think about this for a second. Eck's goal wasn't just to win an argument, it was to brand Luther a heretic, right then and there in front of everyone who mattered. So how do you do that?
The answer is as simple as it is devastating. You make him defend another man who has already been condemned as a heretic.
And there it is, the knockout punch. Eck publicly connects Luther to a name that was poison to everyone in that room, John Huss. He was a Bohemian reformer who'd been burned at the stake for heresy a century earlier. The accusation was absolutely electric. It was like dropping a bomb in the hall.
There's a short break in the debate. Luther comes back into the hall, and he walks right into the trap. With the entire room hanging on his every word, he declares that some of the very ideas that Huss was burned for were in fact plainly Christian and evangelical. You could have heard a pin drop.
And if you want to know the impact, just look at the reaction from the debate's host, Duke George, the very man who insisted this whole thing happen. He muttered a curse, loud enough for everyone around him to hear. The plague. Everybody in that room, from the Duke down to the students, knew exactly what had just happened. Luther had just sided with a condemned heretic.
And this is what it all boiled down to. By defending Huss, Luther was forced to say the quiet part out loud, to state his core revolutionary belief that the ultimate authority isn't the Pope, it isn't a church council, it's the Bible itself. That right there, that's the revolution in a single sentence.
And that was it, the point of no return. The debate forced Luther to not just wear the label of heretic, but to eventually own it. He walked into Leipzig as a reformer, trying to fix the church. He walked out as a declared rebel.
And what's really wild is how quickly things escalated after the debate. I mean, at Leipzig, he's on record saying, "I repulse the charge of Bohemianism." But after Eck forces the issue, Luther actually goes and reads Huss's writings for himself. And just a few months later, by early 1520, he's writing in a letter, "We are all Hussites without knowing it." The transformation was total, and it was fast.
So, in the end, the great irony of the Leipzig debate is this. On paper, it settled nothing. No official verdict was reached. But in reality, it clarified everything. John Eck won the argument. He forced Luther to show his hand. But in doing so, he lost the war. He destroyed any chance for reconciliation and made the break with Rome absolutely inevitable. And all of this leaves us with a huge, echoing question, one that was forged in the fire and tension of that hall in Leipzig. A question that's still relevant today. When does an argument about ideas finally become a revolution?